dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are talking about Little Green by Tish Cohen. Tish Cohen is a Canadian author. She's put out a bunch of books at this point, and they're all really well written, but like light summer reads. And that's what I would say about Little Green. This is the perfect summer read. If you need something, you're sitting on the beach getting some sun, you're sitting in your backyard getting some sun, you're by a pool somewhere getting some sun, this is a great book to read. So up here up top it says, how much pressure can a marriage take? And I love books like that. I love books that look at family dynamics, relationship dynamics, and show an honest portrait, like something true. Because I can't stand books where everything's perfect and everyone's perfect and everyone's happy. That's no fun to me. I like it when it's a little grittier and when things are falling apart. So, Little Green, what's it about? Well, Little Green is about Matt and Elise Sorensen.
Is it Matt? Is his name Matt? Yes, it's Matt.
So this book is about Elise and Matt Sorensen, and they're a married couple. They have a home in one state and they have a summer home in another. The summer home used to belong to Matt's grandfather, and they're getting ready to sell it. They have an 8-year-old daughter named Gracie, and she has cerebral palsy because of an accident that her mother had when she was pregnant. Because you see, Elise is a horseback rider, and she is, what's that, an equestrian? So she's an equestrian with Olympic dreams. She's in her late 30s, and she's on the cusp of getting to go to the Olympics. It's something she's been working her whole life at. When she was pregnant, her husband had asked her not to ride, and she had agreed to that, but one day she was at the stables and she just got on the horse just to take a picture or something like that, but she wasn't going to ride him, she was just going to sit on the horse, and a freak accident happened. A little dog came out of nowhere, was freaking out, and it scared the horse, and the horse threw her off, and that's what caused the cerebral palsy in their daughter. So needless to say, she carries a ton of guilt because of that, and Matt, her husband, carries some resentment because of it, because he had asked her, no horseback riding when you're pregnant. So years have passed now. Gracie is 8. She's a pretty normal kid. She can walk on her own, but it's difficult, so sometimes she uses a cane, or not a cane, sorry, crutches, and that makes her quite mobile. You know, she lives a pretty good normal life. And the way that their home life kind of is Elise is on the road a lot. She's practicing, she's competing, and so Matt, who's a lawyer, he spends a lot of his time with Grace, just staying at home and raising her. And the book starts off with Grace's first performance in a play or in a concert or something like that, and Elise is on the way home from a competition, and she's so excited to see her daughter and be there in the audience. She wants, Grace to be able to look out at the audience and see her mother sitting there. And while she's sitting on the plane, someone gets on and says, Elise, your horse is freaking out in another plane. There's 2 planes. I guess there's horse planes. And he's like, listen, your horse won't get on the horse plane, and you're gonna have to come and deal with that. So she misses the play, and she's very upset about it, and she feels like a terrible mom. So Matt and Grace go to the play, they have a great time, and when they're done, they head up to the summer home that used to be Matt's grandfather's house. And Matt's grandfather raised him. His parents, I think they died in a plane crash when Matt was pretty young. And so his grandfather raised him in this small town, and We get a lot of memories about Matt's grandfather, whose name was Nate, from Matt's perspective. He just, in Matt's memories, he's just talking him up. Like, his grandfather was the greatest man in the world. Like, he idolized him. And then we get some memories about Nate from Elise's point of view, and Elise's memories weren't as sweet. First we start to think, well, it's because, you know, Nate was very protective of his grandson, as you would be. And the thing about Nate and Matt is they had money. They were a wealthy family. And so Nate kind of looked at it as, oh, this young girl who doesn't come from a wealthy family, who's a horseback rider, who, like, that's, I guess, a very expensive hobby to have, and then the deeper you go into it, the further you take it, the more expensive it gets. And Nate was kind of like, don't marry her. She only wants you for your money. She's no good for you. She's never going to be around. And there you go. But Matt, of course, didn't listen. And then, so when Matt was marrying her, Nate was like, okay, well, you didn't listen to me about that, but at the very least, don't have any kids with her, because she's going to be an absent mom. Her ambitions are too big to have a family. It's not fair to the kids. And of course, as we know, they didn't listen to that either. Now, not all of it was true. It's true that Elise is on the road a lot, and she's not around as much for her daughter as she'd like to be, but she was not, and never was, using Matt for his family's money, because I guess there's a lot of, like, wealthy people who will, like, sponsor horseback riders, like let them ride their horses, train them, etc. So money wasn't really an issue. She could have, you know, she could have done that without Matt's money. So there's that. So now, that being said, Matt is headed up to his grandfather's house, this house that he loves more than anything because it's his childhood and it's his grandfather, to get ready to sell it because they do need the money. So right after the concert, he drives up there with Grace, and they go into the house, and it's really the first time he's been in the house since his grandfather died about a year ago. And he's just looking at everything and, you know, having a lot of memories about when he was a kid. That night, Matt's outside, and he sees that there's a neighbor next door, and she sees him, and she's like, oh my god, Matt Sorensen, is that you? And he's like, who are you? And we find out that it's a girl that used to live in the house when they were both kids, and she had kind of been Matt's first girlfriend, and she's back now living there with her son. And so he goes over and they catch up, and the kids play together, and that's that. So then he goes to bed, and then Elise arrives through the night, because once her plane finally gets in and lands, she takes a cab to her house, grabs her car, and drives all night to go and see Matt and Grace, because she doesn't want to wait any longer than possible to see them. So instead of, like, go to bed and then go, she goes right then. One thing we also start to learn when we're getting some of, like, the memories and stuff is that Elise is not very close with her parents. Her parents divorced when she was very young, and she had been the one to actually see with her own eyes her father having an affair. She walked into their home, saw her father with a family friend, and just really clung to that forever, and she wanted nothing to do with him ever again. And that still holds true in the present. She had stayed with her mom. Her mom had a lot of issues, and her mom has since passed away. So Elise arrives at the cabin. She's so happy to see Grace and Matt, and you know, they're happy to see her. Grace starts busily telling her about the new boy she met next door, and so Elise has some questions about that, finds out that it's the mom of the little boy is a woman that Matt grew up with, whose name is Cass. I don't think I told you that. Then from there, there's just a bunch of stuff, you know, them sort of living their life for a little while. There's a lot of, like, everyday stuff. We start to pick up, though, on some tension between Matt and Elise, because Elise kind of swoops in, and, you know, since she's away so much, she tends to let Grace do things that Matt doesn't on a day-to-day basis, and he kind of doesn't like her undermining him like that. He's like, you know, you come in, it's all fun and games, but I like to keep things the way they're supposed to be. And one of the things that kind of goes against what he wants is she signs Grace up for day camp in the town. So it's a small town, everyone knows everyone, and Grace really wants to go because the little boy next door, he's going, and so she signs up. And Matt at first, he's a little irked by it because she hadn't really asked him about it, but in the end, Elise is able to convince him that it'll be for the best. They'll have so much fun and it'll be great. So that takes place like on a Saturday, and they sign her up for the very next day, like a Sunday, because the camp goes 7 days a week. Meanwhile, there's also some other things going on with the house and getting it ready to sell. Matt hires some local workers to replace the roof, to do some roof work. And when he's talking to the workers, he's getting a feeling like they don't like him. And that they don't like him based on who he is and who his grandfather was. And he thinks that's really weird because in his experience, when he's around town, though he hasn't spent a ton of time there since he was a teenager and like went off to college, but in his experience, the fact that he was Nate Sorensen's grandson was a plus. And in his mind, Nate was a savior to the town, was a hero to the town, because since he was a wealthy man, whenever people were in need of like an emergency loan, they would come to him and he would help them out of the goodness of his heart. And so to Matt, his grandfather was heralded in the town, but he's getting these weird vibes from these workers that they don't like him. Another thing that's kind of giving people a bad taste in their mouth is, since Matt is selling the house, and there's hundreds and hundreds of acres that go along with this house, and it's all like lakefront property, everyone in town is pretty sure that who's going to buy it up is going to be a corporation who's going to rip it all down and put up resorts, and nobody in the town wants that. You know, they like the forest and the natural state of how things are with Nate's house on the land instead of, you know. So the one guy who's like the main guy, he's real pissed off and, not really saying anything. And then there's another guy who's kind of a quieter guy, and that guy doesn't really say too much at first either. So they carry on with the work. The next day comes. Grace is out front getting ready to go to camp. And we meet, so Elise goes out with her, Matt comes out too. He's like, I gotta go do some work, I gotta get my axe sharpened so I can like cut some trees and stuff. So he's heading out, and Elise is doing some gardening, and he's like, could you go get some gloves? Like, you're gonna rip your hands up. Go get some gloves. So he leaves, she's standing there with Grace. They meet Cass's mom, who lives across the street. And they're just kind of chatting with her, and so Elise thinks, okay, I'll run and grab the gloves from the shed. The shed's like 20 feet away. So she goes and grabs the gloves, and when she comes back out, Grace is gone. And she's like, oh, did I miss the bus picking her up? And Cass's mom was like, yes, you did. You missed the bus. She came, the bus came, she got on it, and she went. And Elise was like, oh, okay. So she kind of feels a little sad not having been there to see Grace off. So the end of the day comes, and Matt and Elise are standing out on the road waiting for Grace to come home. They're very excited. The bus starts rumbling up the road, and it keeps going past their house. And they're like, what? So Matt runs out, and he's like waving wildly to get the bus's attention. And finally the bus slows down, and the bus driver is like, yeah. And he's like, have you seen Grace? She's like 8. She got on the bus this morning. And the bus driver's like, no, she didn't get on the bus this morning. And he's like, what? And then the bus driver checks the papers, and she wasn't even scheduled to be on the bus, because when they signed her up, they didn't realize they were signing her up for the Sunday. They thought she'd start the next day on Monday. So there's a bit of confusion there. So he's like, no. And so everyone's starting to panic, and Matt's like, okay. And Elise is like, no. Cass's mom was there, and she saw Grace get on the bus. And Matt's like, what? And he's like, yeah. She's like, yeah, Cass's mom was there and she saw Grace get on the bus. She's like, come on, come on. So Elise is running across the road. Well, Matt's calling to her like, just wait a minute. So Elise is knocking on the door and the mom comes out and she's like, hi, you know, like whatever. And Elise is like, hi, remember this morning when you saw Grace get on the bus? And so Cass's mom is just kind of looking at her blankly. And while Elise is panickedly telling her all the things, and then Matt's like, Elise, stop. Cass's mom has really severe Alzheimer's. And Elise is like, what? She's like, yeah, she has really bad Alzheimer's. And then Cass's mom's like, yeah, I saw her get on the bus. Me and Edward saw her. And then by now Cass has come over because she's sort of heard the ruckus. And Elise is like, who's Edward? And Cass is like, that's my dad who died 10 years ago. So that doesn't help them any. So the police get called, the camp counselors get called, everyone's searching everywhere for her and they can't find her. So what I'm going to do is, if you don't want any of the big spoilers, turn away now. Shut this video off. I totally understand. It's a great book. It's well written. The characters are rich. It's just the perfect summer read. It goes down easy. It doesn't take too much energy to focus and try and follow along the story as some books sometimes do. It's just a nice light summer read. So if you like what you've heard so far, definitely check it out. So let's get back into it. So everyone is looking everywhere to try to find this child. The police have set up a tip line in Norway and China. Like, no you haven't. She's just went missing. So all those tips are kind of leading to nowhere and she's just frantic. Also on the other side of things, Matt is furious. He's so mad at Elise for walking away for a minute. He is so mad at himself for having left early and not himself stayed with Grace until she got on the bus. He is so mad at everything. He's so mad that he has to sell his house. He's so mad that just everything. And he starts to turn to Cass and take comfort from her. And eventually they fall into old habits and they start getting too intimate for a married man and his friend to be getting. And at one point he tells Elise, he leaves the house. He's like, listen, I can't stay here with you. I'm too mad. I can't be here. And he leaves. And then he goes and he texts Cass and says, oh, I left Elise. I'm at the hotel. You can come. And she does. And they end up, you know, getting very intimate. During all this time too, Matt is finally getting the one guy to talk, one of the builders that was a little quiet. He's getting him to talk and that guy finally lays it all out for him and he's like, listen, your grandfather was a crook and he preyed on people. Yeah, he would give them loans when they were desperate, but he would give them loans because they were desperate. And he would make them sign down that they would lose their land if they couldn't make good on the payments, and he knew they wouldn't be able to make good on the payments. He's like, because of your grandfather, me and my whole family lost our farm and ended up homeless for a while. All this land that you're sitting on here was taken from people in similar situations because your grandfather was a piece of shit. And Matt's like, what? He's like, no, that can't be right. So he goes to an old friend of his, not Cass, but a different one, a different lady in town who actually works with the summer camp that Grace was supposed to be going to. So while he's there talking to her about Grace and everything, he asks her, is this true? Have you heard of anything like this? Have you heard that my grandfather was a swindler who used to take advantage of people who were in dire straits? And she's like, yeah, yep, it's true. And Matt begins having a crisis. He is so horrified that he can't even deal with it. He decides he's gonna make good and he is not going to rest until he has given everybody back what was wrongly taken from them. And so the way he works it out is, you know, even if those people who his grandfather dealt with are dead, well, they have kids, they have grandkids, they have somebody he can make do. So first he goes to this one guy and he says, okay, the loan your parents took out was for, I think it was like something like, I think that particular instance was like $10,000. You pay me $10,000 and you can have the land back. And so that's what he does. He goes around, he takes back the minimal amount that was loaned to them, or their parents or their grandparents, whatever the case, and then he gives them back their land. So he's doing this, and he's trying to keep his mind occupied while they're still frantically searching for Grace. One other thing starts to happen, and that is that Elise starts to notice a car that keeps circling the area. And it's been a couple days now, and she's seen this car every day, and she's starting to get freaked out. So she takes a picture of the license plate, she calls the cops, has them run it. And it comes back that it's her father. And he had heard on the news that Grace had gone missing, and he came to town hoping that he could help or at least see his daughter. Eventually he gets word to her and he says, listen, I'm going to be at this particular dock at this particular time. Please come, please talk to me, please. Just please. And she does, and it's a good thing that she does, because when she goes and she talks to him, he's pulled up to this dock in this boat, and he's staying at a nearby fishing lodge. And it's a fishing lodge that we know belongs to the head guy who was doing the construction on the roof. So not the quieter guy who Matt's been talking to and has given money to, but the head guy. And that was one of the reasons why he was so upset that Matt and Elise were selling the house, because a resort would get built on that land, and that would give him a lot of competition for his business. So Warren, that's her dad, he tells Elise that he's been staying at this little place run by this guy, and she's like, oh yeah, we know him, he did work on the house. And he's like, yeah, he lives there, it's just him and his granddaughter. They just live there. Nice guy, a little weird, keeps to himself, but... And Elise is like, his granddaughter? He doesn't have any family, because he had told them that when they were working on the roof. And he was never really a suspect when Grace went missing, because so far as they knew, he was on the roof fixing it when she went missing. So Elise is like, oh my god, like, all the wheels are turning, and she's like, that's Grace, and she freaks out and she swims. She jumps out of her dad's boat and swims, it's not very far, over to the place where she knows Grace is being held, so that they won't see the boat coming. So she's like, once you see me coming down with Grace, you come over in the boat and you can grab us. So she goes, she's running through the cabins looking in, she finds Grace. Grace is kind of playing with her dolls. She busts in, she's like, come on Grace, we have to go. So Grace comes with her and they get her. The father comes, takes them, they go back. So she's talking to Grace to find out, like, are you okay? Like, what did he do to you? And she's like, oh, he didn't do anything to me. He just said that I was gonna stay here with him until Daddy promised not to sell Grandpa's house. So that had been his plan. He was gonna use her as like blackmail to stop the sale of the house. So thank God he hadn't hurt her or done anything weird to her. She was fine. So after that, of course, everyone's very, very happy. And also throughout all the panic and the madness, Elise found out that she was pregnant again. And Matt finds out, and it's finding that out that makes Matt, well, it's the whole culmination of it. Grace being back, Elise being pregnant, all of it, it kind of re-energizes his zest for his marriage. So he tells Cass, like, that was a mistake, that can't happen again. And then Matt and Elise and Grace return home happily ever after. The end. Pretty much. But one thing that does happen is Elise does know what happened with Cass and Matt, because right before they're leaving, Elise runs into Cass's house to say goodbye. But Cass is up in the shower and she yells out, she's like, oh, I'm up here, I'll be down in a second. Don't leave without saying goodbye to me. And Elise is like, okay, and she's looking around and she sees a little pile of photographs, because Cass is a photographer, and there are pictures of Matt asleep in the hotel. And so she just kind of puts two and two together and it's like, okay. She takes the pictures so Cass can't have them, and she just decides to let it go, and then they leave and, you know, put their life back in order. So that is Little Green by Tish Cohen. My only complaint really is that it all tied up a little too neatly at the end, with the happily ever after and the whatever, which is fine. You know, there's nothing wrong with a nice happily ever after, but it felt like it happened really fast. But I guess too, you know, if your child gets kidnapped and then gets returned to you, it's gonna change your perspective on things. So I guess if you look at it like that, it makes a little more sense. Anyway, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this book talk video. If you did, please subscribe. I would love that so much. And yeah, if you've read this book, let me know what you thought of it. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.